welcome back to the podcast. Today, I am excited to have back on Marty Skovlund Jr., fellow Midwesterner, Army Ranger, and wow, I'm really getting really good at this. the author of the new book, Send Me, The True Story of a Mother at War. It's a book about Shannon Kent, an amazing story. I got through chapter 10 before I finally talked to Marty here. So I'm glad I at least got that far, so I'm not completely behind on my homework. Marty, thanks for coming on, bro.
Thanks for having me again. This is cool.
Yeah, man, it's great. Let's jump into it, but we were talking a little bit before the podcast, and this is awesome. This is a very long time in the making, and we were talking before this. This is, to this day, when we're recording this podcast, was 5 years ago, the Coffee or Die article came out.
Yep. And that was Shannon Kent, Senior Chief Petty Officer Shannon Kent was killed in Manbij, Syria on January 16th, 2019. So, 5 months and some change, right? Or 5 years and some change, ago. And then it was shortly after that I got introduced to Joe, her husband, and he asked about me doing an article, so I came down to the memorial that was a couple weeks after she was killed in Annapolis, Maryland, and that's when I kind of started my reporting on the story. And it took me a couple months to put together the story. It was a beefy story. It was 5,000-6,000 words maybe, and it came out May 14th, 2019, and it was basically as soon as that article came out, Joe was like, "Yeah, let's do a book." So it's really been, I would quantify that, like, we started working on the book 5 years ago today, basically. So,
yeah. And so, and again, you're obviously the journalist. So how did you come across that story? Because, like I said, she was in a specialized unit. And I think I remember when she was killed, I think, was it made public, because she was working, in some certain areas, but like, how did you find that out? And, what kind of led you down that path of like, all right, who is she? Or, let's write about her. This is an amazing story. Like, how did you end up coming across the story?
Yeah. So, I mean, like everybody else, I saw the news reports when it happened, 4 Americans killed in Syria in a suicide blast. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, the way that things were characterized early on is what drove Joe to want to get the story out, because initially they were saying like, oh, these people were like, they were out to lunch. It just sounded like, but then I knew right away, like just looking at the bios, it's like Shannon Kent, Navy cryptological technician, linguist. Scotty Wirtz, former Navy SEAL, DIA contractor. John Farmer, Special Forces warrant officer. Gadir Tahir, Syrian American linguist. Like, that's not the going out to lunch crowd, So I knew right off the bat that sounded. Yeah. I was like, I don't think that that's what they were doing, Joe, he reached out, like I said, shortly before, our mutual friend, Evan Hafer, he contacted Evan to get a hold, wanted to get her story out, and, Evan connected us. And, I was really excited to hear that both he and Shannon had like read my previous stories and was familiar with the work. And he really felt that I was, because of my background and my work and both in the military and in journalism, felt like I would be a good person to write a story about Shannon. And really that's kind of how it all started, when we initially talked on the phone, I was like, hey, if I can come down to the memorial service, because the memorial service was closed to the media, it was closed to the public. There was a lot of people there, but because of the types of people there, they were not going to have media there. But Joe got me in, and so I was able to attend that. And and like I said, a couple months later, had a story come out on it, and they he and the family felt that my story, out of all the stories that were done on Shannon at that point, New York Times, Washington Post, Stars and Stripes, they all did profiles of Shannon too. They felt that mine was most closely represented Shannon and all that. And so I think that's kind of where, but like I knew just working on it, like I kind of quickly figured out like, oh, this was no average sailor or even average special operator, right? Like Shannon was one of one, in a lot of different ways. So that was kind of the genesis there.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, going through that first half of the book or even more, it's insane. Like we had discussed this before, but the like she was one of one, like especially with her linguistic, like abilities, like being able to pick up on the languages and like the dialects, and then the cryptologist going through the Navy. Like it's a pretty cool, because guys like us, like, we're door kickers, we're infantry guys, like that's where, we exist, that's where we live. But like, it's like when people were like, oh, the Jason Bourne stuff or all this or whatever, like kind of what she was doing was about as close as you kind of get. Not saying like, oh, it's the Jason Bourne, but like truly the amount of talent and the skill, like the stuff that she was doing, and then the selections that she had to go through. And this isn't like a 3-month school and then suddenly you're, the gunfight, the speaking multiple languages and going into the fight and stuff like that. These are like years of honing your craft in, years of honing languages in. And like, even when there was a point in the book where you said that she went to France and then Spain and was like with the backpacker, it was something to do with her reenlistment or something. And then she like spent a year there, like getting like
Yeah.
a fifth language or something, like really getting it down. It was nuts. Like, it's like, oh yeah, I'm just going to learn this. And so she knew everything. It's like, you can't write a character like that because it wouldn't be believable, but she's doing it. Yeah. And you're right. I think that's a great way to describe it. It was like, she's just one of one.
Yeah.
It's insane.
She, it just was an exceptionally driven person, exceptionally intelligent, exceptionally physically gifted. Like there's just, she was the type of person, and one of the reasons she was such a valuable asset was the fact that she could do human intelligence, human. She could do signals intelligence, SIGINT. She could speak the languages. She knew all the pieces for find, fix, finish, right? Like she was a one-stop shop to figure out these things. She could not only collect intelligence, she could also analyze it. Usually those are two separate functions, she could do both. So she was, and that's kind of, I think, how she skyrocketed up through the world of special operations, is because nobody else could really do what she could do, and I do believe that she set an example that now there's like a blueprint almost for it, of like, oh, what if we could get other people to try to do something similar? Because wow, that was really nice to have that capability around. What if we could find other people that maybe could learn multiple disciplines and, all of that. But just Shannon was just such a trailblazer in so many different ways. And it's almost unfair to characterize her as a trailblazer just in the sense of like a woman in special operations before women were even, she did 4 combat deployments before women were officially allowed to fill combat roles. Like, right. Like it just, so, but it would be unfair to characterize that as the only way she was a trailblazer. She was trailblazing in a lot of different ways, that just a lot of people don't realize. And honestly, this book, it's the most complete story about her right now. But I do believe, there's a lot of things that we had to avoid. I think in 25, 50 years, there will be, when things get declassified, things like that, there will potentially be a much more full story to be told. Just right now, we're still too close to a lot of the things. But I was told by, over the course of research for this book, I was told by multiple people that were kind of like read in on stuff. And they were like, the stuff that she was working on and some of the things that she innovated will impact national security for years to come.
Before we keep going with the podcast, I want to drop this week's discount code for Nine Line Apparel. We're not just a brand, we're a lifestyle that celebrates the spirit of freedom, courage, and American values. Go check out our gear, including hoodies, glassware, flags, jackets, hats, patches, and much more. All material is ethically sourced, so every shirt you buy is free of slave labor. As a veteran-owned and operated company, we take pride in giving back to those who've served. Your purchase helps us contribute to charitable initiatives supporting veterans and first responders. This episode's discount code is SENDME20, and that will give you 20% off Nine Line Apparel products. SENDME20. Not 10, not 15, but 20%. Not 25, because that's a bit excessive. So get over to the store and get yourself 20% off your next purchase. While you're at it, like, listen, and subscribe to the Nine Line Podcast for future discount codes and more conversations with amazing guests like today. Now back to the podcast.
Like years to come.
Yeah. And that's what I think is so, it's incredible. Like I said, it's an incredible story because you're right. It's not, I'll say, not take away from any of us, our door kicker buddies, but like, it's just not one event that kind of defines you or yeah, you're part of the SF team or part of Delta or whatever. But like, you're right. Like what she was doing is like, you almost wish you could do it. Like that's something I wish I could do, is like 7 languages. I could go talk with people and then be the door kicker and then collect what's on the ground and then analyze it. And then, you know what I mean? Like you said, it's like something out of a movie. And I think you are right too, as well as with the trailblazer aspect of like women in combat roles, because that's always been a kind of a contentious issue, even with like, putting women in the infantry. I remember right after I had gotten out, that's still a friction point. You know what I mean? Like it's like not quite, people aren't necessarily still on board with that. Women with special operations, it's much more, they're at least getting through the pipeline, but then you kind of hear the stories of like they're pushing them through for like PR sake. Whereas Shannon was just like, she did it. And then, but no one knew about it. And she did her job. And not only did she do it and do her job, she was one of the best, if not the best at her job, which is like a true trailblazer. And like I said, you're right with that blueprint, because I would have never known to be like, yeah, let's go join the Navy and do do cryptology. And then it's like, and then do SIGINT and then do human. And then, oh, but by the way, she speaks multiple languages already. Like, it's almost like if you're a kid in high school, that's like, I want to do some really high speed shit. And they're like, well, you could go the SEAL route, or you can go the Delta, or like, SF, which I think are still phenomenal by all means. But
Sure,
like, if you were like, I want to make this my life, some of us don't learn these things until we're in our 30s or 40s. And then you're still trying to figure that out. But if you are 16, 17, and the next generation of warfighters are like, I want to do the intelligence route, but I also want to be a door kicker, but I also want to be the smart one and make and change policy. Like you said, this book can almost serve as a blueprint of what she did. It'd be like, yeah, join at 17 or 18, do this, and then learn these languages. It's like almost starting in high school. Like I wish I took Arabic in high school. When I was in Iraq, I was like, well, it would have been way better for me to learn Arabic than fucking Japanese. Like I hated that, but or even Spanish now, speaking more Spanish, but like you could almost hit some of the bullet points that she's doing while you read the book and be like, okay, I want to go her route. I can kind of get close to it, but at least you have, like you said, a blueprint. But back in the 2000s or even 2010s, you would have never, you couldn't replicate what she was doing. It's a one-off,
Yeah, especially back then. Like she was the first woman to go through the Navy's new direct support course for SEALs.
Yeah.
Like non-SEAL support was a brand new concept. She was the first woman to graduate that course. Like, that course was new. When she was, integrating into the SEAL teams, like there was definitely a lot of skepticism. It wasn't just because she was a woman; it was because she wasn't a SEAL, and it was the same thing for the men.
Yeah.
Like I've talked to other guys that were in, the teams around that time as support, and we're like, yeah, it was kind of all of us. We all kind of had to prove our worth because it was a new concept for them. And even Joe, Shannon's husband, he was on Jocko's podcast the other day, and Jocko was talking about like, yeah, I remember that time. We all thought it was crazy that we were going to have to take non-SEALs out with us, but then somebody explained it like, hey, we need SEALs to concentrate on SEAL shit, and like you need these other people to concentrate on what they're best in, Mm-hmm. And so it slowly turned that tide, but it was a completely new concept, and Shannon just kept going for one thing after another. She never slowed down. And it's not like, it's not like she joined the Navy with this ambition of getting to where she was, because she didn't know those things existed. She just kept volunteering for one thing after another, and
exactly,
hard, earning her spot, and just things worked out the way they were supposed to.
Yeah, exactly. And it was a trailblazing, because it was just a uncarved path. I mean, like I said, the paths are carved if you want to go SF. Even when you talk about Delta, that's a carved path. Like we've talked about it a few times. It's like, Ranger Regiment, everyone from Rangers wants to go Delta, or very few times Marines try out for it. But like, I didn't even know you could even do that. Like we didn't, and same with the Marine Corps. You're like, okay, we're going to go to Force Recon, and then we want to go to MARSOC, and there's pipelines to go through some of these, like, and 18 X-rays for special forces, buds contracts for SEALs, like, but what she was doing, it's unheard of. And also too, I did love that aspect too, like, she especially getting into the unit, it was like you just had to earn it. Like, it's like, this is great, like this is not a PR stunt coming down from equal opportunity move or something like that. Kind of the stuff that we see now in the military.
That wasn't even a conversation back then.
It wasn't even a conversation. Exactly. It was like, what do you like? You brought that up. People would laugh in your face, like, and the fact that she did it, and it was before that time, and it was like she truly earned her spot. No one was giving her an extra try at schools. No one was giving her a lower PT standard. They weren't writing articles about her when she graduated. It was just she did it, and she kept under the radar, and she was fucking phenomenal. I think that is if you're gonna emulate that, or if you're going to definitely praise women going into special operations roles, like this is like that's the she's absolutely the epitome of like this is what you should be. You keep your mouth shut and you fucking move, just like everyone else. Just like everyone else that goes to that pipeline that are humble, and you go through. You prove yourself to every point.
On that note, awesome. I want to read the first paragraph of the first chapter because it really ties into this. I've got the book right here. 1 second here. All right, so this first paragraph, right? Mm-hmm. Hunting humans, like most trades, is a craft mastered through repetition and experience. Many in the world of special operations spent the better part of the past 2 decades devoted to refining it. But very few transcend from craftsmen to true artisans. Like many great artists in the past, most of their names will not be known during their lifetimes. Mm-hmm. And that's true with Shannon, right?
Yeah.
Wouldn't know her name right now if she was still here, because that world, you don't talk. It is the true silent service,
Yeah.
It's really incredible. And so, the people that are at the very highest levels in that world, you don't know their names during their lifetime. And even in death, a lot of times you don't know. There are people with stars on the CIA memorial, their names on the NSA memorial, that their names are still redacted. Even in death, their work was so sensitive. And there's something to be said about that. They don't do it for praise. They get the respect of their peers within that community, but nothing outside of that, outside of that.
Yeah. And I think that's what really separates your book and her story from kind of everything else that's coming out. We've seen a lot of the bios, or, everyone kind of rolls your eyes. I don't know how many times you want to, read about people going through buds, but like, it's just one of those things where this is genuinely, I was listening to it and I was like, man, this is actually drawing me in. Like, this is something completely different that I have never heard before, and it, like I said, it's just one of those things that when she is trailblazing, you're just like, holy shit. Like, her life just kind of like, it's like not perfect circumstance, because you're like, well, it's war, but it almost is. Like, she joins before 9/11. You know what I mean? And it's just like,
she joined after 9/11.
Oh, was it after? Okay, sorry, after. And it was just like, just shot through. You know what I mean? Like, you just go, and she just, every step she makes, it works for that time frame. Mm-hmm. And just like war always kind of moves tactics forward, moves operations forward, like the way you could strategically do something, it moves a lot of things forward. Like, and me and you have that experience too. Like, what outdated shit were we, trained in, or even our seniors were trained in, that once we got to the battlefield in Iraq and Afghanistan, we were like, this doesn't work. Mm-hmm. And so then our generation would come back and be like, no, stop doing this because this does not work for what we're doing. Like, stop. Like, this, you're always reinventing and redoing stuff. And for her, it was,
and the threat was constantly changing. You think about
exactly. Yeah.
Your first deployment, maybe EFPs were not a problem, but by maybe the next deployment now, hey, you're thinking about copper plated EFPs and the way that they were utilized. And now you have to rethink doing something as simple as driving under a bridge in Iraq, that you maybe didn't have to worry about before. You have to evolve and constantly have that mental malleability to say, hey, how we've always done it isn't necessarily the way we always need to do it. And that's particularly true, I think, in the world of special operations and the intelligence community.
So when you're writing this, I know you've been around, obviously the community for, of Rangers and all this other stuff, but like, but on the journalistic side, we've worked together on projects and whatnot, but how difficult was writing this book to make sure you got all the information you needed out there? You know what I mean? Like, as also listening to the book, I hear Marty's sweet voice there, going and doing the audiobook, but also a lot of name redacted, place redacted, unit redacted, what was that process kind of going like? I know everybody's just frustrated with it. Like you wrote, history of the 75th Ranger Regiment. I'm sure you had to go through stuff with that as well. But like this seems at a whole nother level, of.
So that first book, Violence of Action, I definitely got a sense of like what those pre-publication reviews would be looking for. And and both Joe and I were completely aligned on, we're not trying to write some sort of special operations expose or reveal any secrets or jeopardize OPSEC or PERSEC for the sake of selling a few more books. Like, not what we were trying to do. So, we kind of knew the things that we needed to avoid and the things that were sensitive, and we knew where to direct things. So in Shannon's case, you'll notice, a big part of her job was very technical. On the cover of the book, we have binary code, right? You will notice in the book, we don't really talk about anything technical. It's all focused on the human aspects and that sort of thing. And then there's entire areas where we just kind of focused on other aspects of her life because what she was doing for work was just, we couldn't put it in the book, and so it was challenging. When you think about writing a book and having enough material for a book about somebody's life, and they're in Shannon's case, she's no longer here. I can't talk to her and get and just ask questions. I can't do that. And then on top of that, almost her entire professional life was highly classified, and so how do you do that? And that's part of that was like we really wrapped up the book and went into production last October. I was still adding paragraphs up till the last day because of new things I would find out, or somebody was like, hey, did you talk to this person? I'm like, I didn't know that person fucking existed. Like, okay, and all this different stuff. And there's a lot of people she worked with. They're just, passionate about Shannon, wanted her story to be told, but like, they can't talk to the media, they just can't, their world, they have to be super careful. And I respect that, but so it was challenging. But I think we did it right. And I have, since the book has gotten out there, I have talking to people from her world, and they all were really good about, they reassured me that this was done the right way. You and Joe did a great job. Everything's accurate. And we appreciate that you guys worked around things that shouldn't have been in the book, And so on one hand, it's like, hey, I'm really glad that we got everything. Like everything is like pretty accurate. And then on the other side, that like, hey, I'm glad nobody's upset that something was included that shouldn't have been. In our case, it would have been very unintentionally, but like, I'm glad that there was no unintentional errors that we put something in that shouldn't have been there. But we did do the right thing. This went through both DOD and CIA pre-publication review. So like, we did this thing the right way.
Yeah, exactly. And it would be fun. Like I say, you don't have to say anything or whatever, or go too deep in it. But was there a bunch of stuff you're just like, holy shit, this would have been amazing to put into a book? Or like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just one of those things. Like, I'm sure the stories you heard would never see the light of day. But was there a few in there? Like, you don't have to obviously say what they are or anything. But was there a few that you're just like, God damn, are you serious? Or is it like, oh wow, that's something that we do? Holy shit,
Yes.
Just simple. One word. Yes.
Affirmative.
Affirmative. Yeah. That's awesome, bro. So, so the process then of getting the book out, and then, like I said, you're constantly talking to people. How many people did you talk to? Like I said, the community is pretty, I won't say closed off, but obviously, you worked with Joe, her husband. How many people did it take then to kind of piece a lot of this together?
About 40. 40. And not all of them were people from the military or intelligence community. Some of them were family members, high school friends, stuff like that. But about 40 people in total. And then, I got my hand on every document that I could, award citations, fit reps, all that sort of stuff. Even little details like, some of Shannon's notes, some of her college papers, things like that, emails, text messages, anything that I could get my hands on that could give us insight into how she thought, what she thought about, conversations that she had, all that sort of stuff. Like, did everything that I could. It was a rigorous researching attempt, to say the least. Talked to a lot of people on, excuse me. Oh, sorry about that.
Bless you.
You can cut around that in the podcast if not. Rigorous researching attempt. And, at the end of the day, it was, we got everything in there. And even when it came to the non-class stuff, like, her childhood and things like that, I was selective about what I put in the book, because at the end of the day, you also have to think about story structure and things like that. And what stories from like her early life are going to foreshadow things that happen later in the book. And so I thought a lot about structure too, when thinking about like, we can't throw the entire kitchen sink in there. This has to make sense from a story perspective as well. So, not that I left a lot out, but like it's, we were definitely, I try to get as many sort of like vignettes about her life that, I try to do a lot of character development, so to speak. And I hate to talk about somebody who gave their life in defense of our nation as like a character, but like for the purposes of, writing a book, you do think in the terms of like, hey, character development and that sort of stuff. I wanted people to really get to know Shannon and really kind of like fall in love with her, right? Like, and feel like they knew her, so that by the time we get towards the end of the book, there's like this impending sense of doom, and you almost like want to dread. You're almost dreading finishing the book because you know what's coming, and then when you do get to that part, maybe you feel like 1/1000th of the loss that Joe and the Kent family and the Smith family felt. So I wanted to do that, and in order to do that, you had to do a lot of just stories that like not everything is action packed, but like it tells you aspects of her life. Things like, oh, she loved gardening. She loved doing these beautiful mosaics. She was an artist. She liked Sailor Jerry's and and cheese, and she could do an amazing South Park impressions, like stuff like that. It's not imperative to the story, but like it helps to round out. She liked Rothman's cigarettes over in Iraq and Syria. Just little details that like make you feel like you really know her. And so I tried to do as much as I could to really let people get to know the person, Shannon Kent, and kind of take off that Superman cape and make her a person. It's like, oh yeah, this is like a person I can identify, because it would have been very easy to just paint her in this very heroic light the entire book, because she was. But we wanted these things in there that like humanized her, and these moments. Joe was so great about opening up their relationship and these conversations, these tough conversations that they had as a married couple. And I think there's some stuff in there that a lot of, especially military couples, are going to really be able to identify with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's the thing too, is like, you have her husband who is also part of all these operations, is like, I love the story of the first time that they met or whatever, he's running operations and in Iraq and whatnot. And, how was that working with him? Because it's not just, I should say just, but like, like Gold Star families, they don't ever know what happened. Like, in fact, sometimes they don't know whatever happened for years. In fact, I, like, not to bring up my own story, but like with the battle that I was awarded the Silver Star, the Vose's brother was a Marine, I think Lieutenant Colonel. And so until I spoke publicly 10 years later, he didn't know. He was like, who is this guy? Like, who is he? And then he reached out to the team, was like, that was the Marine that was with your brother. And so it took a decade for even him to find out the full story, or even, what happened, or that amount of detail, but Joe, he's much closer to it than, say, I don't want to say regular family, but, most families they haven't even been in the military. So how was that working with him? He knows a lot of details. Obviously he's an incredible asset to tell her story, but more than just like a husband, but like as a, almost, and say brothers in arms, but like, it's just one of those things where he just knows so much. But how was that for you? And how was that for him too? I mean, it's obviously a very emotional story for him, and he's very involved. How was that process?
So yeah, I mean, definitely, like both Shannon and Joe came from the same world. They did have that very unique ability to be able to just talk frankly and with candor with each other about their work in a way that a lot of people in the world can't with their spouses, because Shannon and Joe kind of have the same clearances and all that sort of stuff. They were able to communicate while deployed and stuff over, those different networks and stuff that you have that are, and they could talk frankly about their day and stuff in a way that most people in that position can't when they call home or whatever. And yeah, even including her death, like obviously, he had access to everything, as far as knowing what happened and knew the people in that world. And there's also, it's not like you couldn't bullshit the guy anyway. Like, he's from that world. He knew what was up.
Yeah.
Him and Shannon were, getting briefed on a lot of the same things, all that sort of thing, so yeah, a very unique situation as far as being a gold star spouse. Joe, I cannot praise him enough for how, sort of easy he made it for me to be able to ask him questions and have frank conversations about things. I mean, he was cool headed the entire time. And really, I think just devoted and very mission focused on making sure Shannon's story was told and told right, And so from day one, when I came down there for the memorial, he was put together and ready to talk and all that sort of stuff. And all that being said, like, it's not like he sat there and told me a bunch of national secrets or anything like that. Like, he was still a professional and is a professional to this day, as far as like, hey, there's some things that we're not going to talk about, and rightly so, so Joe, like I said, I can't thank him enough for being as professional as he was and mission focused as he was in telling Shannon's story and wanting to get it out there. And he poured his heart into this. Like I said, he didn't have to be as transparent as he was about some of the conversations. They had some of those tough marital conversations that they had to have. I mean, he put himself out there, even if he didn't always look like the good guy in it. All of us as men, a lot of times we're not the good guy in those conversations with our spouse, right? And that was certainly true with Joe. But he, really wanted the truth to be out there and figured that other couples probably go through it too. And maybe knowing that even a couple like Shannon and Joe at the level they were at were kind of struggling with the same things, maybe that will help other people, So, Joe was great.
Yeah. Now, that's the unique thing that you do bring up, is like the fact that they would be able to talk to each other about, it's not just like they're both in the military, but whatever, like he was a cook or something. It's like they have the same clearances, do the same work at that insanely high level, and to be like, how was your day? And I was like, holy shit, you should, you know anything about this? It's almost like having like a business partner that you could almost play off of, like, what do you think we could do? And then you're just at that level that you would be able to help problem solve with each other.
Yeah.
And this crazy group, and also there's
relationship too, where a lot of people from that background, they can't be totally open with their spouse about like, hey, I'm going here and doing this. They kind of have to just say like, hey, I'm deploying and
exactly.
I'll call you when I get there, sort of thing. And with Shannon and Joe, I think that they could be really honest with each other, like, hey, I'm going here and doing this, and oh, okay, got it, and that, and also like the spouse being able to understand, Shannon and Joe could understand exactly what the other person was doing, not just because they told them, hey, I'm going here and doing this, but like they're from that world, so they understand all the things that go into that,
exactly. Like,
that's pretty unique.
It's an insanely small community too, so it's like you could be texted, be like, hey, is everything cool? You know what I mean? Like, everything's just, you're it's so small, but it's so like, like I said, you're plugged in almost no matter what. So that was a pretty unique, like I said, I like how you kind of brought that up, where they would be able to play off each other. But at the same time, I mean, like I said, the book covers so much. Like I said, the fact that she was a mother, the fact that she was a wife, the fact that she was a high level operator, linguist, everything. I mean, the book does almost have, kind of, I don't want to say everything for everyone, but it does, and I think we can, like you brought up, we both relate to that. Like, when do you push and when do you kind of give in? When do you say, yeah, okay, this is worth doing and straining a marriage? Or when do you say, okay, I got to call it and I'm not going on this one? When you say, I got to put the family before the mission, which is hard. I mean, that's, we've all been through it, especially in our younger years, and navigating that's a little bit easier in our older years. We're not tier 1 operators right now here on this podcast. It's just,
I was wondering the reason the 75th Ranger Regiment is not tier 1.
Yeah, there was, by the way, I was actually going to ask you about that, not because of you, but there was a story in there about they got grounded for 90 days because of a Ranger incident or something like that. It was like a raid gone wrong and the Rangers had to stand down. What was that story? I imagine that was public and everything like that, right?
No,
it's not.
No,
okay. Never mind. Okay.
That is what's in the book.
Oh, got it. Okay. That's about it. Okay. All right. I didn't know if that was like a public thing. Cause I mean, like we had shit like that in the Marine Corps. It was like, yeah, the journalist said they massacred a bunch of people. And now, I think it was like 3-1 or something like that was, under massive investigations or something like that. I was like, oh, all right, well, that probably might have been public, but never mind. It didn't go public.
No, but it occasionally happened, where there was, something would happen and there would be scrutiny about it. And until things were resolved, the strike force would be shut down. It happened from time to time, not just to Rangers, but across the different special operations task forces. And it was a thing that happened.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So anyway, so back to the original point, but yeah, I think that is something, like I said, I think the book is unique in that aspect. Like it covers so many different things that people can take away from it. Like I said, the marriage aspect, having the kids, understanding, how far do you go? How far do you push? Like even, like I said, I got to chapter 10, but it's on that aspect too, when she was finding out about the working for the Department of State, and being like, I can still operate as a foreign affairs officer, and because she wanted to have a family or whatever. Like that was crossing her mind a little bit, working with,
I think she was considering a lot of different options, because once
it was like,
started having kids, it was like, okay, like I don't think that we can sustain what we're doing right now. So like, what are the different options that we can explore?
Yeah, exactly.
Certainly Joe was coming up on retirement. He ended up transitioning over to the CIA after he retired from the Army. And, Shannon was in the process of trying to become a psychiatrist. It was accepted into a PhD program. But the other piece of that is you have to commission as a naval officer. For naval officers to go from enlisted to naval officers, they're subject to accession medical standards, not retention medical standards. And so because she'd had a bout of cancer cut out and it was completely resolved, but because that was in her medical jacket, she did not meet accession standards. So even though she was accepted into a PhD program, the Navy said, you can't do this because you can't become a naval officer. That she fought that. She went to Congress. She brought all the way up the chain of command as far as she could, and it basically arrived at, you're going to have to convince Congress to change this. Nobody in the military can change this. And she's like, all right, well, I guess I'll go to fucking Congress. And that's what she did. And it wasn't until in her, after she'd passed that rule was changed. Mm-hmm. So, and there are now naval officers today because of the fight Shannon fought on that front.
Yeah. Which is, like I said, that's still, that in itself is a legacy that, they could do that once, that one thing in their career. And that's like a huge game changer. And that's just I don't say a blip on her radar, but that was just like one more notch in her cap, that's just like of this insane story.
I mean, that's the biggest thing about Shannon is like, she wasn't one of these people that just said when she was told no, or you can't do this, like she didn't just throw up her hands and say, oh shucks, I guess I can't. She figured out a way to like if she felt strongly about something, she would find a way to push the issue, and she was smart enough to do it and resourceful enough. She, was the type of person that just wasn't gonna, accept no if she felt like there was a way to get to yes on something that mattered. And overall, that comes from a sense of, at the end of the day, like she cared, like she gave a shit. She wasn't lackadaisical and just like trying to do her time in the military. Obviously, like she cared about the organization she was a part of. It was a big deal to her that she was a chief in the United States Navy, and that meant something to her. Those anchors on her uniform meant something to her. She cared for the sailors in her charge and the other military personnel in her charge. Like she cared. She gave a shit, you know? And everybody that's been in the military for longer than a day, we've all come across leaders that didn't. And you could tell they're just counting the days until they get out or whatever. Shannon wasn't that person.
Yeah. And I think, like I said, that came across in the book too, because it almost like jazzed me up a little bit. Like, you know, when they're talking about hunting down targets, getting the analytics done, getting, you know, like where locations, like the cell phone, the mistresses, the, you know, like, you know, of the leaders. And it's like, you could tell it came across in the book, like she truly cared, you know, and for guys like us that kept redeploying, like we cared about the mission. You wanted to know more about the culture. You wanted to know more. It's like every single piece of intel you wanted to soak up, and you could tell she was doing that. And like I said, it's like I was listening to it and I was like, that is kind of like jazzes you up a little bit, you know, like, man, you know, it would have been great to know that language, or great to know that type of intel, you know, like problem solving that, like, where does that lead to? Okay. So if I can't figure it out myself, you can tell she went to the next thing. It was like you said, the humid and the SIGINT aspect, you know, it's a little bit more popularized. I shouldn't say in today's culture per se, but like I think access to some of those skills are a little bit more open. You know, like we've used it, and especially when Ukraine, it kind of blew the doors open a little bit more on open sourcing a lot of that stuff. But like back then, though, that wasn't you just don't hop online and ask Chat GPT how to write code or how to, you know, do flippers or do all this other stuff. That's all, you know, called secret squirrel, but you know, it's a little bit more known to the public now, or if you want to get into it as a hobby now, you know, but back then it's like, that's a whole other thing. But she went after it, and she knew how to figure out how to track the cell phones, and like, you know, playing off the human intelligence aspect. And then on top of that, she knew the language, she knew the dialect, she understood the culture, you know, and being able to put that all into one package, like you said, like in the book, it's just you know, she was an incredible asset, you know, to the U.S. military, you know, and like, and at the same time, she gave a shit, you know, and it's impressive because, you know, like I said, the aspect of like us guys kicking doors down and getting into firefights and all that stuff, like that's where our, you know, past led us. And that's where a lot, you know, most of us think of war fighters going in and doing that. But with her, it's like, man, that's just another level. And it's like, you just wish you had a tenth of the skill that she had intellectually, you know,
that's the thing, is you run into that a lot too when you talk about women in special operations. People kind of default to say like, oh, she must have been in like CST or like the cultural support team. So I'm like, no, she was out there doing the job long before that was even a thought in anybody's head to stand those up, you know. Like, you know, and people a lot of times try to like say like, oh, she was just like support or something. Like, no, I mean, certainly she started out that way as like intel support for these things, but you know, by the time she was killed, you know, that like guys with a trident or a long tab or these things, right? Like they were supporting her, like she was the mission, you know. It was not like, oh, she's just some support intel chick. Like, well, you know, like, no, she was working at a very high level, you know, and no, she was not just, and again, I'm not trying to talk down to CST or anything like that. I'm not, but like, those women did a very important job as well. But it's just not accurate to quantify what Shannon's impact was in those terms. That's not
no, I agree with
you. Job was, it's not like she was doing the thing long before those were even stood up. So I think just as a matter of record, like people should understand this is a different type of story. Shannon was a different type of person.
Absolutely.
Her work was
and I agree with you, because we had lionesses, and then in the Marine Corps, and then, you know, I know the CST teams in the Army, but that's not the same, because it's not like they had gone through crap loads of pipelines, and, you know, and again, I agree with you, not to take away from that, but like, that's like a volunteer thing. Like, hey, you guys want to try on this team? You're going to search women. You'll have an interpreter. We just can't search them. And it was, you know what I mean? Like, you're like, oh, okay, cool. Like they did more than that, but you're right though, that like what she had gone through it's like 1,000 times way more layered than a CST or a Linus. Again, not taken away from anything, but like, that wasn't that the path that she took and what she could do and what her capabilities were and what even her qualifications were. I mean, the selections that she went through, even going into the doing, quote unquote support for the SEALs, you know what I mean? Like when they stood that up, like they still had to go through a rigorous process to even do that, and then to keep moving forward and then to go into, the other selections, redacted selections, that is we've talked you've talked before, even the Delta guys are like, those guys are another fucking level. That's even those guys are like, you think we're cool, go, they're true.
I'm not going to speak for those guys or anything. I was neither.
I know. No, I know. But I've talked with a few, in having a bourbon or whatever, and I just bring them, that unit up, and they're just like, oh yeah, those guys were there, because the Delta guys are great. Like they're humble too, and they're just like, hey man, we're glorified door kickers. Like, well, no, you're not. You guys are you're Delta. You're SMU. But like even those guys, when you bring that unit up, or even people in that sphere are like, yeah, that's another level, man. Like, they are insanely professional, insanely intelligent. That's the mission. And, and again, not to go too deep into it, but like I said, we've talked before, it's just like, sometimes in the book you have it or you don't, you can do that unit or you can't do that unit. And it's nothing against you. It's just sometimes you just don't have what it takes. And that's not even physically. Like a lot of people think it's physical, it's both physical and mental. What's your competency, and the fact that she spoke 7 different languages, the fact that she was multiple combat veteran, not just a combat veteran, but she had done intelligence analyst, human, everything. Mm-hmm. And like I said, it's an incredible story, especially when you just kind of step back and just go, oh God, okay. Cause you've told me the story and, I'm like, okay, that sounds cool. And until I got to the book today, as I was, doing the Cliff Notes and listened to it, it's like, it definitely took me by surprise how incredibly skilled she was in all those aspects, and how she did, and then physically too, she was crushing dudes on that, and she was incredibly humble. And it was before they were trying to do the push to put women in. She just did it. She just, like I said, she just trailblazed, and it's insanely impressive to read that and to hear that. And like I said, the book is different than what I was expecting it to be. Like me and you've talked over the last years of like, oh yeah, this is cool. Like, and I'm like, this will be a really good book, but I didn't know the extent of who she was until you read the book. And I do, and I will recommend it to a lot of people, where it's just like, you got to read this fucking thing. Like if you want to, admire strong women, this is one of those. And you're like, cause it's an incredible story, and it's not, it's not what people try to promote today, but it's something that people should be reading into, that are, definitely, you want some inspiration on, both sides of the aisle. This is the book,
Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you right now that when I've got 2 young daughters, when they're a little bit older, they're going to be reading this book, Mm-hmm. My youngest daughter, her middle name is Shannon, after Shannon Kent. Shannon is a role model that, not just girls or young women should be looking at, like all of us. Like I look up to Shannon mm-hmm. Kent, I wish I could have been able to meet her and talk to her, and just, I'm so jealous. I've met people that, worked with her and everything. And, they were in awe of her even at the time, and they didn't even know everything, like I wish I had the chance to meet her. Like she is a role model. She is somebody that we should, gosh, I hope the story spreads far and wide, because I think it could inspire so many people. I think her story could have a great impact on so many. And also, it does tell a broader story about the intelligence community and the important work that they do. One of my favorite quotes that I heard at her memorial service by one of the speakers there, he was like, a lot of people think that us cryptological, technicians. We are stored away in windowless rooms, deciphering code or translating secret documents, far from the front lines. And then, he paused and he said, if that were true, we wouldn't be here today, and it really, like, those people in that line of work, especially at this level, they don't do it for recognition. They do it because they're patriotic and it's the right thing to do. And they want to perform at a high level and serve their nation at the highest level. And they don't get the credit, and they stay silent when people make inaccurate assumptions about what they do or what they don't do or whatever. They just keep doing their work. And I hope that this book, the story is only able to be told because Shannon is no longer with us. I hope that this book serves as that thing that, people understand now, like, oh, okay, I get what has happened. I get the intel world a little bit better now. I get the contributions people that work in that side of the military make on our behalf, and the sacrifices that they make, and how extremely talented and intelligent that they are. The book, I think, serves a lot of purposes. The main one, obviously, to tell Shannon's story, inspire other people, and make people recognize, how much we lost when Shannon was killed on January 16th, 2019. But also, it tells a broader story, so.
Yeah, and speaking of that, then, people within the community, like, I do love that aspect of the silent professional. Obviously, yes, in the GY, you see a lot of guys, getting out or writing books and going that route. But it is something that, I think shedding at least a little bit of light on what they do is helpful. Like I said, like, I look at this and I'm like, fuck, man, that would have been, that's something that I wish I knew about. Like it's like, I learned a lot of stuff after I got out. I was exposed to a lot of stuff I was in, but it's just that learning curve, just like, oh shit, I just try to, oh, this is cool. I didn't know we could do that. Oh, I didn't know that was a tactic. Or I could, oh, these people exist. Oh, that's awesome. And then you get out and you're like, I wish I would have known that, because that would have made me a better fighter. That would have made me a better infantryman. That would have made me a better sniper, better combat advisor. I wish I could have easily talked to whatever teams are around. You know what I mean? Like, you just, sometimes a lot of things are compartmentalized.
Yep.
And I'm sure, obviously, the unit that she was a part of and the stuff that they were doing obviously needs to stay at a secret level, and there's a reason why they don't speak and they take things to the grave. But is there a aspect that some of these guys in the community and gals, obviously, are happy that, it's kind of shedding some light onto them, as in, like I said, people that these aren't going to be a lot of kids that are going to be like, I want to be a Navy SEAL, let's go try out. Like, this is another level of, and a different type of mindset, that maybe this opens up a door to people that would be great, but they would have never known about it. You know what I mean? Like, hey, maybe we can do a little bit more recruiting and getting more operators like her, because they're not dropping the standard. I mean, you don't even know who the fuck this unit is, quote unquote. So there's, you know what I mean? Like, it's not, there's not going to be some headline.
They don't publish their.
Yeah. Oh. Exactly. Like the congressman, or like, like even with special forces, there's like chosen soldiers get selected for special forces, or something, or like Navy SEAL buds, or how many books you can to pass. But at least with this book could shed some light on kind of that unit, or where enough kids could actually, I don't say kids, but, like people coming through the military to be like, you know what, this is something I would like to do. This might open up a door, or, is that community a little bit more like, okay, we talked a little bit previous to this, where they're happy with how you guys wrote it, very respectful, that you didn't go into details and all this other stuff, but you honored the story. But also, just like I said, where they kind of like, this could bring in people that we would have never attracted because they just didn't know about us, that would actually be really good fit. Are they kind of happy about that? Like shedding like just enough light to be like, hey, if you feel like you can do this, or, give it a shot.
Yeah. I mean, nobody said anything directly to that, but, I've talked to people that work, not necessarily specifically the places Shannon worked, but just other military intelligence professionals that have read this book, and they've said, like, yeah, we think that this is a great representation of the intel profession. And, hopefully it is something that, if somebody thinks that this is cool or that something they might be good at, hey, there's a place to go ply your trade, so I don't know.
Yeah.
Certainly the stuff Shannon was doing when she was killed, it's not entry level by any stretch. You got to start somewhere.
No, God, no.
Maybe there are some people that say, hey, I'd like to go take a crack at the intel world rather than just jumping straight to, SEAL, Green Beret, Ranger, something like that. So I don't know. There's a lot of people that maybe don't go that route because they just didn't know, or, so yeah, I don't know. I do hope that there's some people that pick up this book are inspired by the story and say, hey, I think I could do something similar. I could contribute to the mission in a similar way. And maybe they find their way, into the intel world, just, again, more broadly, just anywhere in the intel world. So, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. So, now, the book's out. This is a labor of love for how long did it take you to write? 3 years or so? I mean, ever since I've known you.
About 5 years. Yeah.
About 5 years. Yeah. Even from that first article. So what's next? You got the book release. You going out Oprah? Oprah's book club? Or?
I'm on the 9 Line podcast. We circled that.
Yeah.
Said we got to do this.
Yeah. This has to be done. 9 Line.
Yeah, it's we're hitting a lot of podcasts, a lot of radio shows. I called into a radio show earlier today, and just every opportunity we can get. And Joe was just recently on Jocko's podcast. That was really big. And we're just every opportunity we can to spread the word about this story, the word about the book, and we hope people pick it up, give it a read, and are similarly inspired and moved by Shannon's story, and tell people about it. We really believe that Shannon should have a page in the history books, and should be seen in the same light as people like Virginia Hall and these other great Americans. We just got to get the story out there. I think you could do a lot of good.
That's awesome. That's great. So where can people pick up the book, audiobooks, all that stuff?
Yeah. So the book, Send Me the True Story of a Mother at War. That's the book. Just published on May 7th. And it is available everywhere books are sold. So you can go to your local Barnes & Noble. They should have a copy. You can go online. Any of the, places books are sold, really, they should have it. So, and then it's available, in hardcover, ebook as well as audiobook. I know you dove into the audiobook. I narrate that. Joe read his note at the beginning, and then I kind of narrate the story. And if you're into audiobooks, definitely check that out. But like I said, we've got the hardcovers out there, we've got the ebooks out there. Whatever format you prefer to consume your books in, it's available. And yeah, like I said, available everywhere books are sold.
That's great, bro. So where can people find you at?
Definitely, like I said, go check out the book. But I'm on all the normal social media platforms, just my name, Marty Skovlund Jr. I'm the editor-in-chief over at Task and Purpose. So, definitely check out taskandpurpose.com. And then you can find Joe Kent on all the socials as well. So.
Hell yeah. Well, thanks for coming on, bro.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. This is great.